March 17, 1943. 52 degrees north, 31 degrees west. Mid-Atlantic. The coordinates meant nothing to Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke as he ordered you, 5:15, to surface into the black void of a moonless night. What mattered was the message waiting to be transmitted to BDU headquarters in Lorya: convoy position, course, speed. Intelligence that would bring the wolf pack. The diesel engines coughed to life, pushing compressed air through the ballast tanks with a hiss that seemed deafening in the silence of the empty ocean. Henke climbed through the conning tower hatch, his lungs burning as they adjusted from the fetid interior atmosphere to the clean, salt-heavy air of the surface. The Atlantic stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and seemingly empty. "Funker, prepare transmission," Henke called down. Below, the radio operator adjusted his headset and powered up the transmitter. The message was brief, encoded in Enigma cipher, ready to burst across the airwaves in less than 10 seconds. Every U-boat commander knew the doctrine: surface, transmit, submerge. Speed was security. The vastness of the Atlantic was their shield. What Henke couldn't see, couldn't even imagine, was the invisible web of electromagnetic energy about to betray his position. 43 miles to the northeast, aboard the British destroyer HMS Hesperus, Petty Officer Thomas McKnight sat before a cathode ray oscilloscope, watching a green phosphorescent line trace across the screen. The moment U-515's transmitter powered up, that line jumped violently, forming a spike that pointed like an accusing finger directly at Henke's submarine. "Contact bearing 237, McKnight reported calmly, his voice betraying none of the adrenaline surge that came with every detection. "Range approximately 40 miles. Signal strength indicates surfaced U-boat." Commander Donald McIntyre, Hesperus's captain, was already moving toward the plot table before McKnight finished speaking. "All ahead full. Action stations." Within 90 seconds, Hesperus was knifing through the dark sea at 28 knots, her bow wave glowing with phosphorescence. 3 other escorts in the convoy screen received the bearing data via secure radio. They were already turning, forming a net that was closing around you, 5:15 with mathematical precision. Henke's transmission lasted exactly 8 seconds. 8 seconds to doom his boat and crew. He ordered the dive, unaware that his brief radio message had just painted a target on his position visible to ships scattered across hundreds of square miles of ocean. U-515 slipped beneath the waves, and Henke settled into his command chair, confident in the security of German naval communications. The Enigma machine was unbreakable. The British mathematician who had shattered that myth, Alan Turing, was at that moment 3,000 miles away at Bletchley Park, but his work was only half the story. The technology hunting Henke that night had nothing to do with breaking codes. High-frequency direction finding, HF/DF, pronounced Huff-Duff by the sailors who operated it, didn't care what the message said. It cared only that the message existed. Every electromagnetic transmission created a wavefront that propagated outward at the speed of light, and those waves could be detected, measured, and traced back to their source with devastating accuracy. The concept wasn't new. Shore-based direction-finding stations had existed since World War I, massive installations with antenna arrays hundreds of feet across that could locate transmitters within a few degrees of bearing. But those systems required long transmissions, minutes, not seconds, and multiple widely separated stations to triangulate a position. They were useless against submarines that transmitted in brief bursts and moved constantly across the vast ocean. What changed everything was miniaturization and sensitivity. British and American engineers had independently developed compact HF/DF systems that could fit aboard escort vessels, systems sensitive enough to detect and locate a 5-second transmission at ranges exceeding 300 miles. The breakthrough came from advances in radio receiver design, sophisticated antenna arrays, and most critically, the cathode ray oscilloscope that displayed bearing information instantly, allowing operators to read a U-boat's position in real time. The Germans' new direction-finding technology existed. What they fatally underestimated was how far it had advanced. German naval intelligence, the B-Dienst, had studied the problem extensively and concluded that shipboard HF/DF was theoretically possible but practically limited. Their analysis, delivered to Admiral Dönitz in early 1942, was reassuring. Such systems would require antenna arrays too large for destroyer-sized vessels, would lack the sensitivity to detect brief tactical transmissions, and would provide only rough bearings useless for attack coordination. Every conclusion was catastrophically wrong. By late 1942, the British FH-4HF/DF set and its American cousin, the DAQ system, were operational on hundreds of escort vessels. These weren't experimental prototypes. They were production models, installed as standard equipment, operated by trained specialists who were becoming terrifyingly proficient at their deadly craft. The technology itself was elegantly simple in concept, fiendishly complex in execution. The rotating loop antenna, driven by a small electric motor, continuously scanned the horizon. When a transmission occurred, the operator would manually rotate the antenna until the signal strength peaked on the oscilloscope, indicating the antenna was pointing directly at the source. A compass rose integrated into the display gave the bearing instantly. The entire process, from detection to bearing determination, took less than 3 seconds for an experienced operator. But HF/DF's true power emerged when multiple ships detected the same transmission. 2 ships with different bearings could draw lines on a plot that intersected at the U-boat's position. Basic triangulation geometry learned in school, applied with lethal efficiency in the North Atlantic. 3 or more ships could pinpoint a submarine to within a few hundred yards, close enough for accurate depth charge attacks, even against a submerged contact. The early adopters of HF/DF were the British escort groups, particularly the specialized support groups that hunted U-boats aggressively rather than simply defending convoys. Commander Peter Gretton's B-7 escort group, Commander McIntyre's group centered on Hesperus, and Walker's second support group became legendary for their HF/DF-directed kills. They developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the technology. Loose formations that maximized triangulation accuracy, rapid response protocols, coordinated attacks that gave submarines no time to react. American escort groups in the Atlantic adopted HF/DF slightly later but with characteristic enthusiasm for technology-driven solutions. The destroyer escorts rolling off American production lines in 1943 were designed from the keel up to accommodate HF/DF systems, with antenna mounts integrated into the superstructure and dedicated plotting rooms for the operators. By mid-1943, nearly every American escort in the Atlantic carried HF/DF equipment, and their operators were trained to the same exacting standards as their British counterparts. Werner Henke aboard U-515 had no idea he was being hunted with such precision. Submerged at periscope depth, he crept forward on electric motors, conserving battery power, waiting for dawn to bring the convoy within attack range. The boat was silent except for the gentle hum of ventilation fans and the soft pinging of the depth gauge. His crew moved quietly, speaking in whispers, confident in the invisibility that submersion provided. Above them, Hesperus and 3 other escorts were executing what the Royal Navy called a creeping attack. A slow, methodical search pattern centered on the HF/DF fix, using Aztec sonar to probe the depths. The water conditions were good, a sharp thermocline at 80 feet that made sonar detection difficult, but the escorts had time and patience. They knew, with absolute certainty, that a U-boat was in this area. HF/DF had told them so. At 0447 hours, Hesperus's sonar operator reported solid contact at 1,200 yards. McIntyre ordered full speed, the destroyer surging forward as the depth charge crews scrambled to their stations. The first pattern of 10 charges, set to detonate at 150 and 250 feet, went over the side at precise intervals. U-515 heard them coming, the accelerating propeller noise, the splashes as the barrels hit the water, and Henke ordered emergency deep, the boat tilting sharply downward as the diving planes bit into the water. The explosions walked across U-515 like the footsteps of a giant. The pressure hull screamed and flexed, light bulbs shattered, cork insulation rained from the overhead, and men were thrown against bulkheads. But the boat held together, diving through 250 feet, through 300, deeper than Henke had ever taken her, deeper than the design specifications permitted. At 380 feet, with the hull groaning ominously and small leaks springing from rivet holes, he finally leveled off, ordering silent running. For 6 hours, U-515 played a deadly game of hide-and-seek with her hunters. Henke used every trick he knew, laying on the bottom, ejecting oil and debris to simulate destruction, executing sharp turns to break sonar contact. Several times he thought he'd escaped, only to hear the thrum of propellers returning, more depth charges falling. The escorts were relentless, and their accuracy was uncanny. It was as if they could see through the water. What Henke didn't understand was that Hesperus wasn't hunting alone. The HF/DF net had given the escorts his position with enough accuracy that even when they lost sonar contact, they knew where to search. And every time U-515 tried to creep away, the escort's coordinated search pattern, planned in the plotting room using the original HF/DF bearings, would find him again. At 1,137 hours, U-515's battery was nearly exhausted, the air was foul, and Henke faced the choice every U-boat commander dreaded: surface and fight, or suffocate slowly in the depths. He chose to surface, gambling that he could fight his way clear, or at least allow his crew to abandon ship before she sank. U-515 blew ballast and clawed toward the surface, her electric motors straining against the weight of compressed air forcing water from the tanks. She broke surface 600 yards from HMS Hesperus. Henke's gun crews scrambled to man the deck gun and anti-aircraft weapons, but McIntyre had been waiting for exactly this moment. Hesperus's 4-inch guns opened fire immediately, the first salvo striking U-515's conning tower and killing Henke instantly. The second salvo holed the pressure hull forward. Within 90 seconds, U-515 was sinking by the bow, her crew jumping into the icy Atlantic. Hesperus rescued 16 survivors from the water. 44 men, including Werner Henke, went down with the boat. The pattern repeated itself across the North Atlantic throughout the spring of 1943. U-boats transmitted tactical messages, convoy sightings, position reports, weather data, and Allied escorts materialized from the empty ocean with impossible accuracy. The Germans noticed the correlation. How could they not? But their conclusion was that Allied intelligence had broken Enigma, not that the transmissions themselves were betraying U-boat positions. This was partially correct. Bletchley Park was reading German naval Enigma with increasing regularity by 1943, providing strategic intelligence about U-boat deployments, patrol areas, and operational orders. But tactical intelligence, the real-time location of individual submarines, came primarily from HF/DF. The two technologies were synergistic. Enigma decrypts told the Allies where to position their convoy routes and hunting groups. HF/DF told them exactly where specific U-boats were at any given moment. Admiral Dönitz, commanding the U-boat force from his headquarters in Paris, watched his losses climb with growing alarm. In March 1943, he lost 15 U-boats. In April, 15 more. Then came Black May, as it would be known in German naval history, when 41 U-boats were sunk, the worst monthly loss of the entire war. The mathematics were devastating. Dönitz needed to sink 600,000 tons of Allied shipping per month to offset new construction. In May 1943, his U-boats sank only 264,000 tons while losing submarines at a rate that would annihilate the entire force within a year. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz made the decision that marked Germany's defeat in the Battle of the Atlantic. He withdrew his U-boats from the North Atlantic convoy routes. The wolf packs that had nearly strangled Britain were pulled back, scattered to less dangerous patrol areas where losses might be sustainable. It was an admission that the Allies had achieved technological and tactical superiority, so complete that continuing the battle would accomplish nothing except the waste of submarines and trained crews. But Dönitz didn't understand why he was losing. His post-action reports from surviving commanders described phenomena that seemed impossible. Allied warships appearing within minutes of transmission, convoys altering course before U-boats could attack positions, depth charges falling with uncanny accuracy even when boats thought they were safely hidden. German naval intelligence assembled these reports and drew the wrong conclusion. The Allies must have broken Enigma. In response, the Kriegsmarine introduced new procedures. Shorter transmissions, different frequencies, more complex encryption protocols. Nothing worked. The losses continued. What the Germans never grasped was that HF/DF didn't care about encryption. A 5-second burst of encrypted gibberish produced exactly the same electromagnetic signature as a 5-second burst of plain text. The content was irrelevant. The transmission itself was the betrayal. The security surrounding HF/DF was extraordinary. British and American intelligence services classified every aspect of the technology at the highest levels. Operators were forbidden from discussing their work even with fellow crew members not involved in HF/DF operations. When escort vessels were damaged or sunk, HF/DF equipment was destroyed or rendered inoperable before abandoning ship. Captured equipment that fell into German hands was disguised to look like conventional radio direction-finding gear, and German analysis consistently underestimated its capabilities. The deception was so successful that even after the war, many German naval officers remained unaware of HF/DF's role in their defeat. During interrogations, when Allied intelligence officers explained how HF/DF worked, the reactions ranged from disbelief to despair. Kapitänleutnant Werner, one of the few U-boat commanders to survive the entire war, wrote in his memoir, "We had been transmitting our own death warrants. Every message we sent gave the enemy our exact position. And we did it for 3 years, never suspecting, never knowing." The technology continued evolving throughout the war. By 1944, American-designed HF/DF sets could detect transmissions at ranges exceeding 600 miles, far beyond visual or sonar range. The British FH-4 system became so sensitive that operators could identify individual U-boats by subtle characteristics in their transmission signatures: frequency drift, signal modulation, even the particular fist of individual radio operators. U-boats became trackable not just during transmissions, but across multiple transmissions, allowing Allied intelligence to build comprehensive pictures of submarine movements and patrol patterns. The escort carrier groups that devastated the U-boat force in 1944 relied heavily on HF/DF for targeting. Aircraft launched from these small carriers would fly toward HF/DF bearings, using their altitude advantage to spot surfaced U-boats that thought they were safely hidden in the vast Atlantic. Captain Frederick Walker's second support group, operating from the escort carrier Audacity and later Biter, perfected this combined arms approach, sinking 6 U-boats in a single patrol using HF/DF to vector aircraft onto targets. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was devastating. Submariners began calling the Atlantic the Valley of Death. The casualty rate for U-boat service was 75%. 3 out of every 4 men who went to sea in U-boats never came home. Many survivors developed what modern psychology would recognize as combat trauma, reporting nightmares about depth charges and an irrational fear of radio equipment. Some commanders refused to transmit except in dire emergencies, which degraded the operational effectiveness of the wolf pack tactics that depended on communication and coordination. Dönitz himself never fully understood what had defeated him. In his memoirs, published years after the war, he attributed the Allied victory to a combination of factors: superior numbers, air power, radar, and the breaking of Enigma. He mentions direction finding only briefly, dismissing it as one of many technologies the Allies employed. The truth was more focused. HF/DF was the single most effective anti-submarine technology of the war in terms of U-boats sunk per unit cost. British operational research calculated that HF/DF contributed to approximately 40% of all U-boat sinkings in the Atlantic after its widespread deployment in 1943. Some estimates put the figure higher. The technology was so effective that its very existence remained classified long after the war ended, with full details not released until the 1970s. Even then, many technical specifications remained secret, presumably because similar systems were still in operational use by NATO navies. The human cost was staggering. Of the 1,162 U-boats commissioned by the Kriegsmarine during World War II, 783 were lost to enemy action. Approximately 28,000 German submariners died at sea, out of a total force of 40,000 men. Many of these deaths can be attributed directly or indirectly to HF/DF. Submarines detected and attacked moments after transmitting, wolf packs broken up before they could form effective attack groups, patrol areas compromised before U-boats even arrived. In the Allied navies, HF/DF operators were among the most decorated enlisted men of the war, though their citations rarely mentioned the specific technology they employed. Petty Officer Thomas McKnight, who detected U-515's fatal transmission, received the Distinguished Service Medal for his role in multiple U-boat sinkings, the citation vaguely crediting his exceptional skill in radio detection operations. He never spoke publicly about his wartime service until the 1980s, decades after classification restrictions were lifted. The tactical situation by late 1944 had become hopeless for the U-boats. Allied escort groups operated with near impunity, their HF/DF equipment so sophisticated and their operators so skilled that German submarines could barely communicate without being detected and attacked. Dönitz introduced the Type XXI U-boat, a revolutionary design with high underwater speed and the ability to remain submerged for extended periods, specifically to counter Allied detection technologies. But only a handful became operational before the war ended, too few and too late to affect the outcome. On April 30, 1945, as Soviet forces battled through Berlin, Dönitz received Hitler's political testament naming him as the Führer's successor. One of his first acts as head of the German government was to order the U-boat force to cease offensive operations. The order came too late to save many boats. In the final week of the war, several U-boats were sunk by Allied forces still prosecuting the anti-submarine campaign with HF/DF-guided efficiency. After the German surrender, Allied intelligence teams swept through captured U-boat facilities, confiscating documents and interrogating personnel. Among the captured materials were German naval intelligence assessments of Allied anti-submarine capabilities. These documents revealed the extent of German ignorance about HF/DF. They knew it existed but consistently underestimated its range, accuracy, and operational significance. The Germans had built their entire tactical doctrine around assumptions about Allied capabilities that were years out of date. Perhaps the most poignant captured document was a training manual for U-boat radio operators, dated January 1945, that emphasized the importance of brief transmissions for security. The enemy's direction-finding capabilities are limited, the manual assured operators. Brief coded messages, transmitted while surfaced present minimal risk of detection. Every word was tragically wrong. By 1945, Allied HF/DF could detect and locate even burst transmissions lasting less than 2 seconds. The strategic implications extended beyond the immediate tactical victories. HF/DF's effectiveness meant that Allied convoys could be routed around known U-boat concentrations with confidence, reducing losses while forcing German submarines to waste fuel and time repositioning. The technology enabled aggressive hunter-killer operations that kept U-boats on the defensive, unable to concentrate for coordinated attacks. Most importantly, it forced the Kriegsmarine into a death spiral. Losses created pressure for more aggressive tactics requiring more radio communication, which generated more HF/DF detections, which caused more losses. In the decades after the war, naval historians and operational researchers studied the Battle of the Atlantic exhaustively, attempting to identify the decisive factors that turned the tide. Radar, code-breaking, air power, increased escort numbers, improved tactics, all played crucial roles. But increasingly, researchers concluded that HF/DF was the technology that made all the others effective. Without the ability to locate U-boats in real time, radar was of limited use. Without tactical intelligence on submarine positions, Enigma decrypts provided only strategic guidance. Without knowing where to search, numerical superiority in escorts and aircraft meant little in the vastness of the Atlantic. The legacy of HF/DF extended into the Cold War. Soviet submarines, observing the fate of the U-boats, developed strict radio silence protocols and sophisticated burst transmission techniques. NATO navies continued refining direction-finding technology, eventually creating systems that could locate transmitters from satellites. The fundamental principle remained unchanged. Any electromagnetic emission can be detected, located, and exploited by an adversary with sufficient technical capability. For the survivors of the U-boat force, learning about HF/DF's role in their defeat brought a strange mixture of relief and bitterness. Relief that there was a rational explanation for what had seemed like supernatural Allied capabilities. Bitterness that they had fought bravely and skillfully against an invisible enemy they never knew existed. "We thought we were fighting ships and aircraft," one veteran commented in a 1970s documentary. "We never imagined we were fighting our own radio transmitters." The German submariners who died never knowing why their invisible enemy always found them deserve recognition not as failed warriors, but as men who fought courageously against technological odds they couldn't understand. They did their duty as they understood it, following doctrine that seemed sound, trusting in security measures that seemed adequate. They died not because they failed, but because their enemy had achieved a fundamental breakthrough in electronic warfare that rewrote the rules of naval combat. The Battle of the Atlantic was ultimately won not by superior courage or tactical brilliance, Both sides demonstrated those qualities abundantly, but by superior technology and the industrial capacity to deploy it at scale. HF/DF represented the Allied advantages in miniaturization, electronics, mass production, and operational security. Every escort vessel became a listening post. Every transmission became a potential death sentence. And the German U-boat force, one of the most sophisticated military organizations in history, was dismantled by technology they dismissed as impossible. The coordinates where U-515 met her end, 52 degrees north, 31 degrees west, are marked on no memorial, remembered by no monument. The 44 men who died that March morning sleep forever in the cold Atlantic darkness, never knowing that Werner Henke's 8-second transmission had summoned their destroyer. They are joined by thousands of their comrades who surfaced to transmit messages and never returned, victims of an enemy that struck from beyond the horizon with impossible accuracy. The high-frequency direction-finding technology that killed them remained secret for decades, a silent weapon that won the Atlantic campaign while leaving no visible trace. No burning wreckage fell from the sky, no torpedoes tracked through the water, no shells screamed overhead. Just electromagnetic waves, invisible and silent, traveling at the speed of light, carrying not messages but death warrants to submarines that thought themselves safely hidden in the vast ocean. The Germans never knew. And that, perhaps, is the darkest irony of all.